Greetings, everyone. It is Thursday night, and welcome once again to the Sports Crib, home of the Sports Crib. Not well. I see Mr. Carroll is down there in the queue. He's been waiting very patiently. Mr. Carroll, how you doing this evening?
Always a pleasure. Had to finish up some work, had a Zoom call and finished it up, and now I'm here.
And I'm assuming that we're all listening to Thursday Night Football instead of watching it.
Yeah, well, there's always that.
uh, but it was Dallas, and we always we're going to talk about the Cowboys sooner or later. But before we get into all that, uh, Mr. Carroll, I'm sure you can fill us in on what's going on in baseball as far as the history of the lockout. The first since 96, I believe, 95, 96 season. And of course, I remember it, but I remember a lot of old things. But for those relatively young people, a lot of them have heard about the lockout, but some of them were just being born in 95 and 96.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it is the first work stoppage since the 94-95 player strike, and there's still fairly high hopes that they'll be able to get something resolved prior to spring training. Spring training may end up being affected, maybe being shortened, truncated, delayed. I guess we'll figure that out. Rob Manfred, at his press conference, called the work stoppage bad for business, but also indicated he was very optimistic that something was going to get worked out and that the season, in his opinion, was likely to start on time. So, as the old saying goes, it's a fight between millionaires and billionaires, and that's a fairly accurate description. The Major League Baseball is a $10 billion, more or less, $10 billion business. And the big question is, how will that $10 billion be distributed? So what will happen is essentially, as soon as the Major League Baseball Players Association, which, as we've discussed previously, is the strongest of all the player unions in all of the major sports and minor sports as well while we're at it, but it's by far the strongest union of all in sports, period. And with a lot of room between this one and I guess probably the NBA Players Association is probably the second strongest, but there's significant room between the number one and number two. So what does this mean, as people like to say? Well, what's going to happen, or what is happening, is that they're trying to work out a way to divide up that, that number we talked about earlier, the 10 billion or so. And the concern, or at least the expressed concern of the owners and the commissioner, is that if they don't make changes, they will unduly affect negatively small market teams. Now, one might say,
after the Dodgers and the Red Sox and the Yankees get their 6 million, then the other four, those other teams can have that 4 million and do what they want with it, right?
Yeah, well, here's what's happening. So, as you know, this is also coinciding where they're taking place at the same time that normally the quote unquote hot stove league would be shifting into, it has been shifted into high gear. So, during the lockout, players can receive any signing bonus or any deferred salary payments, though they're not going to be paid any of their base salary during the lockout, for however long it lasts. So there's a few players who have signing bonus payments that are still coming to them. Jose Barrios, Paul Goldschmidt, Miles Mikolas, Jason Hayward, Jerks and Profar are some of them. And Max Scherzer just recently completed a contract, as you probably remember. So he, in that contract, was to receive $105 million in deferred salary, and that bill begins to come due in early 2022. Washington owes him $15 million on the 1st of July every year from 2022 to 2028. So even if the worst case scenario plays out and say the lockout extends all the way until say June or something, Scherzer would receive his $15 million deferred salary payment on the next July the 1st. So those are exceptions to the not getting paid thing. So, a lot of times players will have their salary moved from sort of the normal time period. And of course, the most famous example is still Bobby Bonilla, who is, his contract should be in the Hall of Fame. They should have a plaque with his contract embossed in bronze in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. It is truly a marvel for the ages. But also, it means there's no workouts at team facilities going on during this.
I wonder if there's a sports agent Hall of Fame, because I'm sure it would definitely be there.
Yeah, well, people like Scott Boras would be first ballot if they did have an agents Hall of Fame. Now, some people have asked about drug testing. Now, since there is currently no collective bargaining agreement in place, there's not a definitive answer, but I would say it's very unlikely that anybody will be tested for either banned substances or any kind of substances.
Well, hasn't marijuana been removed from that banned substances list?
Yeah. So currently, and once again, that was under a collective bargaining agreement that no longer exists. So if the agreement is no longer in place, right? That was collectively bargained, like everything that between the Major League Baseball Players Association and ownership. And so when that agreement is, when the sun sets on that agreement, it possibly could also sunset on that. But I was going to say, players were not drug tested during the most recent both NHL and NFL lockouts. So my guess is that there'll probably be no players randomly tested during this lockout. Though it's not impossible, it's unlikely. Players are not precluded from playing in other leagues, believe it or not, including winter baseball, independent leagues, overseas professional leagues, Japan, Korea, etc. So, as an example, several NHL players during their last work stoppage played either in Europe or in Russia. Now, the Players Association would fight any ban that would try to block a player from playing in another league during the lockout. And so that is not in place. The minor leagues, however, can go on business as usual. The only exception being players who are on a 40-man roster, basically essentially members of the union. So if you have played enough at the major league level to have joined the Major League Baseball Players Association, then you are then also precluded from playing in the minor leagues, though not, as you said earlier, from other leagues we just mentioned. But any non-40 roster players are able to play in the minors. However, it'll be interesting to see if they try to just bring up a bunch of minor leaguers to play in the majors, because there is sort of there's a bit of a taboo there. They would not be precluded from doing it, but it would look bad, for lack of a way of putting it, and might serve to, sort of sour things between whoever that is and their future teammates that they were seen as crossing the picket line. But there's nothing to make it impossible to do so. So that's another thing that is sort of in play. The minor league season will begin, or is scheduled to begin, on the 8th of April. And should the lockout extend beyond that point, we could see nationally broadcast minor league games, similar to what ESPN did with Korean baseball during the pandemic shutdown. There are some notable minor leaguers, so people who are serious about tracking some of the, more well-known prospects, like Adley Rutschman, the shortstop of the Royals, and this makes you feel super old, Bobby Witt Jr. Bobby Witt Jr. Rutschman is the catcher with the Orioles, and Bobby Witt Jr., of course, the son of Bobby Witt, is a shortstop with the Royals, and Riley Green is, of course, a Tiger's most prominent uh, prospect. So, but what people want to know, I guess, want to know is why, right? Why is it happening? Well, there's two kinds of work stoppages that take place, and not just in sports, but in life, in work. A strike, which is when the labor side decides to put a halt to any sort of work, and a lockout was the management side, the team owners in this case, decide to put a stop to everything. So, a lockout is a refusal to allow people to come to work, in essence, and a strike is a refusal to go to work, to put it in those kinds of terms. So, since all transactions are now put on hold, a lockout means no trades. Players are now barred from using team facilities. Rule 5 draft and winter meetings will now be canceled or at least postponed. If the lockout should stretch, long enough, then the exchange of arbitration figures between eligible players and the teams would also be delayed. The spring training schedules that could be probably will be altered unless they get this taken care of in the next couple of weeks. Worst case scenario would be they would force rescheduling or cancellation of regular season games. But once again, they might be able to work something out prior to that happening. So since there's not a current CBA, the owners are afraid, I guess, for lack of a way of putting it. Since there's no CBA in place, they either will have to, of course, agree to another collective bargaining agreement or agree to not have one. And of course, I think that's highly unlikely. So the lockout, well advanced of spring training, is a preemptive strike, in essence, or a preemptive measure on behalf of the owners and commissioners to accelerate the pace of CBA negotiations, kind of put a little pressure on the players, and to make it more likely the players will then bend, they're hoping, to the owners on multiple fronts. So they're trying to put pressure on them to agree to give some concessions, in essence. That's really what it's about. Now, the players' union sees this for what it is. They see it for the pressure tactic it is. They've made it clear they don't. And I'll read just directly from what Tony Clark, the president of the union, said. That regardless of the timing, the shutdown is a dramatic measure. It is not required by law or any other reason. It's the owner's choice, plain and simple, and is calculated to pressure players into relinquishing rights and benefits and abandoning good faith bargaining proposals that will not benefit not only the players but the game and the industry as a whole. So clearly, we have no idea how long this will last. My assumption is prior to the beginning of the regular season, we'll probably see something happen. I mean, something about the coming of the actual season tends to, get things moving. So here's what the players would like to address, right? The shrinking share of the league revenues indicated in part by declining average player salary, the occasional practice of service time manipulation where teams intentionally hold back a clearly ready prospect, to delay that date, the expiration date, in essence, on them becoming arbitration eligible. And some might even call it tanking, in that you are taking a player who could contribute to your team winning and keeping them on the farm just to delay the day they become arbitration eligible. Teams have increasingly started trended younger players in their roster construction, so the union is fighting to get those younger players paid more in line with their on-field value. Also, they were trying to get additional incentives to make some teams more competitive with another. The owners are likely trying to maintain the status quo since the expiring CBA largely worked to their benefit. In the end, of course, they're fighting over money, right? Which is the reason that every, strike, lockout, labor action, or whatever term you want to use, has taken place since the beginning of labor movements. So those are some of the main things that are being decided, fought over, however you want to put it. And essentially, it's going to come down to me, to who wants to hold out the longest. The owners think they can outlast the players, and we'll find out soon if they're right or if they're wrong.
Well, like I said, for some this is new. For a lot of us, this is ancient history.
Right. We
And,
remember. I mean, I don't remember the one. Well, I guess there wasn't any before the '70s, right? Because the Players Association didn't come into being until the
no,
late 1960s. So,
no.
so I remember all of them, right? I think about it. I think
Yeah, at some point or another, yeah, you have to go back to all of them. And you know, we'll see. Baseball usually finds a way to get their things worked out a little bit easier than some of the other sports. Uh, like you said, having one of the stronger unions. But once again, we'll see how unions and sports seem to align themselves with this new political climate. Speaking of that, I have to give a shout out to a good friend of mine. I spent the weekend in Vegas at the fights, and a good friend of mine, Mr. Bones Adams, who I had intended to spend some time with at Print Trans Boxing, got called out to train a fighter who is on the Thriller program tonight. Well, Triller, I believe they call it. Triller. He's a heavyweight. Mr. Michael Hunter is the gentleman that he will be training. And anyone that's in the boxing pay per view, go to and watch that Triller program, and you'll see it. A very good up and coming heavyweight. Um, Bill had a little experience at the Las Vegas airport that reminded me of the old days, getting stuck in an airport, missing a flight, and because of weather, of course, San Diego being socked in. So I ended up spending the night curled around a backpack instead of a duffel bag. But you know, after 40 years, quite an experience. Thankful, thank God I have a good physical therapist, and you know, but uh, it was my first flight. After after this pandemic, and I was kind of looking forward to it. So it was a you know very interesting experience, and it I guess it was because I came back on a Monday and did experience that weekend traffic. I found out that the lines weren't too bad. Now our colleague uh, Demetrius is on an international flight, and I also know someone else that was on their way to England. They managed to land in time and whatnot, but it's a little different. I imagine over there than it is over here. So, uh, we wish all well wishes to Demetrius in his travels. Hopefully, Mr. Hayes will be here a little bit. A little bit. He has some high school officiating to do, but hey, time is something that is not of the essence to us. So maybe we'll be here when he gets here, and maybe we won't. But let's talk a little NBA here. I was kind of surprised. I guess that would be because the Iceman. I came across this video, and I guess it's been written by more than one sports scene, Yahoo, or just by especially the NBA. But the Iceman was celebrated because he was in the NBA's top 75. And I was going through all of these different um, top that we've had, top 100, top 50, top this, top that. And I would have thought, and I guess once again it's dating me, that he would have certainly been within the top 50. What was your thoughts?
right. Well, so my My memories of George Iceman Gervin stretch back to my original introduction to professional basketball, which in my case was the ABA. Uh, in my hometown, we had the Squires, and the Squires at one point were going to have both young George Gervin and young
Ralph Sampson, right?
at the same time.
Was it Ralph Sampson?
No. This is Ralph Sampson would have been in elementary school at the time I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ABA. So
Yeah.
this would have been the Squires would have had both George Gervin and Julius Erving, but it was decided
Oh.
by the powers that be within the ABA that they should try to put Julius Erving in their largest market, which of course is the New York market. So he was then moved to the Nets, depriving me as a young man of having the great pleasure of getting to watch George Gervin and Julius Erving on the same Virginia Squires team. But I guess the reason, if one wanted to rationalize why you would not have George Gervin in the top 50, it would be because while he's not quite the non-entity on defense that, say, a guy like James Harden is, he was not exactly a stalwart defender, I think it would be fair to say. I got a chance to see a fair amount of George Gervin. He made the occasional defensive play, but he wasn't exactly sticky. He wasn't a stopper. He wasn't a guy that you were afraid of facing on the defensive end. So if that's the rationale, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I can understand.
But that wasn't the purpose of the purpose of the ABA was to entertain. It wasn't to, I mean, they came up, some of the things that were allowed in the ABA weren't allowed in the NBA. Which made it
Yeah. No,
a lot more
I'm
flashy.
agreeing with that. Yes. No, I'm just talking about. I'm talking about somebody. If someone said I don't have him in the top 50 of all time, and if they gave their reason is that he was not a great defender,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
but I would have him in my personal top 50 if you're asking me personally. I'm just saying if somebody said the reason they don't have him there is because he wasn't much of a defender, I wouldn't be able to really disagree with that part of it because he wasn't. He wasn't a great defender, but he was one of the great all court scorers because he could score from, I mean, the 3-point shot wasn't a big deal, obviously. I mean, but he could shoot as far out as he needed to. But he did most of his damage in the lane at a time when, I mean, almost every great defender, every great center in the game's history, outside of like George Mikan and a couple of guys that played in the 40s and 50s, Gervin faced most of the best defensive centers in the history of basketball. I guess he may have just missed Russell, right? but I think he caught Wilt right at the very end of his career. Wasn't Wilt a conquistador for like a half minute?
Well, I don't remember. I'm trying. He may
I
have
know he
been, but
signed with them. I don't know if I can't remember if Wilt ever played with the Conquistadors, but I remember very much he signed a contract because it was big news when he signed. But he played against Nate Thurmond. He played against Artis Gilmore. He played, I mean, what's his name? Bob Lanier. I mean, a long list of great defenders, right? And he scored, despite the fact that he was facing many of the greatest defensive centers the game has ever seen. Kareem. I mean, name them, right? Name all the great centers of because that was the golden age of centers, the early 70s, and he managed to get into the lane and get that finger roll or that little turnaround, or I mean, he could score with either hand. He could score moving towards the basket, moving away from the basket, cutting across the lane. He had every kind of shot there was. He had all the shots, right? Scoops, half hooks, everything. He had all the shots. So he was one of the great scorers the game's ever seen. And if he played now in today's game, he might go for 33, 35, 36 points a game. I mean, because they don't really play defense anymore. I mean, can you imagine what that guy like George Gervin could do with all that length and the way he could just glide? And like I said, he could score with every, either hand. And now he'd be a better 3-point shooter because he'd work on it more because everybody shoots threes nowadays. So you have to figure, yeah, he'd be a 30-something point a night guy.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I remember a lot of the nights, the Iceman, you talk about that. If you weren't talking about the Iceman going down the lane, you were talking about Julius Erving. So, you know, that's kind of what that league was all about. So, defense was not their forte. Um, the Bulls and the Heat. They lose picks over this Lonzo Ball, Kyle Lowry trade, so-called trade deal. What do you think? Do you think that they're kind of using this as a test case? Because you can't tell me. I mean, this is nothing more than what we've seen going on for a few years now.
So are you asking, was it worth it? I'm trying to make sure I understand the question.
Well, the question is, are they using the Bulls and the Heat as kind of saying, look, we're trying to clean up our act, although we know that this practice has been kind of been hinted at for the last at least 5 years, if not longer.
Got it. I mean, I guess I do understand the question now. I I mean, I think a lot of what we're just seeing here, what we're talking about here, is an attempt to. You're familiar with the military term to show the flag, right, James? Right? Remember
Right,
that term?
right.
To me, that's what it feels like. Hey, there it is. We're showing the flag. That's what it feels like to me. If it's
Right.
more than maybe
I
I'm
think
misread.
that's an excellent analogy. But you have to probably have to explain it more to the lay people. But yeah,
Oh, right. Yes. Well, I mean, so every once in a while, um, somebody would say, "Hey, let's we think someone so's hanging on outside the wire. Go on patrol, show the flag. Don't get hurt. You know, just let them know you're there, right?" Um, so sometimes you would just go get a detail together, take a squad, maybe two, go outside the wire for a little bit, let them know you're about, then go back inside the wire, have lunch. Um, Sometimes you do things just to let people know that you're paying attention. That's what that feels like to me.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. It's like but like I said, these are practices that have kind of been going on behind uh, uh, in the back rooms more or less for the last few years. So I wasn't alarmed by it, but I was kind of surprised that there was any action taken. I thought it would be more of a slap on the wrist, which I guess in these two teams' cases it may be. Uh, but let's talk a little bit about LeBron. Uh, First, we had the nagging injuries, and then we had the suspension. Uh, I think the latest word is that he'll be able to be back this weekend after having two negative tests. Uh, but if you notice his tweet, I believe it was uh, Wednesday night. Kind of thinking that maybe the end it was a little bit things were getting a little fishy with the way the NBA was treating him. I mean, after all, he is uh, after Kobe and a few. Well, right now he is the face of the NBA. Whether
Mhm.
it may be a debate whether who's the best player between him and KD, but LeBron is the face of the NBA. How do you think he handled this whole situation from the suspension, you know, the nagging injuries? I mean, the the hardest thing for an elite athlete or soldier, for that matter, is to admit, when that body is not responding the way it used to.
Well, we've talked about this more than once, more than twice. Um, LeBron is 36, and he's not a young 36. He entered the league, right, as an 18-year-old, and he's been playing big minutes since jump, right? I mean, he sort of hit the league playing a lot of minutes, and in his prime, he would play practically all of every game for an entire season. I mean, close to it. He would play 38, 37, crazy numbers of minutes, right, for whole years at a time. So he is an older 36, right? He's taken a lot of mileage on that body. So when you add LeBron's actual physical chronological age to his basketball age has got to be like mid 50s. You know what I mean? In terms of just the amount. When you think of how much he's played, and then he's been in the playoffs every year of his career. Well, but one, some crazy number of years. I guess there's a couple of years he didn't, but he's made the playoffs. It seems like the last 10 years in a row or something, and made a fairly deep run most of those years. So you add the extra games, you add the sheer number of minutes played. So I'm not going to blame him, for the fact that his body is beginning to wear out a little bit. That's completely normal and to be expected. The stuff he said about the fishy comments, whatever, I don't know. I don't put much stake in that. Doesn't feel like anything to me. Like it just feels like just a man complaining. People complain. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. He's a complainer. Sometimes he's complaining. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't feel like very much to me. And what was the other question? What is the other thing?
No, I was just saying that when we were talking about the COVID thing. Well, now we know that he's passed 2 tests and he should be back. The next game for the Lakers, I believe, because
Right.
yes, he does have to sit out the 10 days.
Right.
So that's kind of a moot point. After the new testing. So. We were talking about George Gervin before, but there's 2 other sharpshooters that come to mind in the modern day: Ray Allen and Reggie Miller. Well,
Yep.
we've passed one, and I believe we're only a few points away from passing the other. I don't know whether Steph is playing tonight or not, but Steph is on the verge. It should be sometime this month. I believe he's like 34 threes away or 31 threes away from
Right. Which
beating Ray Allen.
could be 3 games. I mean, like that's. I mean, uh, somebody tweeted out that he's the most influential player since Jordan, and I had to think about that because Jordan's influence wasn't so much on the style of play of the game. His influence was on our culture, right? He influenced American culture. He got white kids in rural America, right, to have a black sports hero. I mean, it was just that was to me the biggest change. The biggest thing was just how he impacted culturally. He was
I think when I think of Steph, I think of Steph and Kareem because Kareem, the unstoppable skyhook. Steph, where do you pick him up before he steps across the half court line? At the half court, where do you pick Steph up at?
right. But here's the difference. Even though every 7-footer in America should have adopted the sky, they didn't for reasons I still don't really understand. But now every kid, if you watch youth basketball, particularly every smaller kid, what are they doing? They're hoisting up threes, James. Kids, and not just normal threes. Some of them. I mean, you'll see kids in youth basketball, 12-year-olds, man, in youth basketball, hoisted up, from like 7-8 feet inside of half court because they've seen Steph do it and they've worked on it in their backyard or whatever. So, in terms of the way the game is played, he may be the most influential player In terms of style of play, oh man, how far back would you have? I mean, Maravich, kind of, sort of, got people. Kuzi, I'm trying to think of people who actually got people to try to play like them. Oh my gosh. I mean, you have to go back a long ways to find somebody who was influential in terms of influencing young people to try to play the game the way they play the game.
I would have to say Maravich. Uh,
Yeah, maybe Pistol Pete was because he made it. First of all, he was one of the first white players to play like that. I mean, have all that, to use a term, sauce, right? You have all that flavor, have that whatever term you want to use. Uh, he played the game, in a way that kids from the Bronx could look up to, even though he was this white kid from, nowhere near where they were from, very different, background. But the thing is, like I said, Steph is changing the way kids and heck, even older people approach playing, even though they're just playing in a church league or playing whatever. People are hoisting up threes who have no business hoisting up threes, frankly, James, because of Steph Curry.
Most definitely, yeah. But once again, I'm going to show my age here because I do remember when you talk about how guys influence. I do remember trying to pattern my set shot as my foul shot after watching Bob Cousy with that set shot. It was like, so
Yeah,
like this is the way you make foul shots. But so yeah, like you said, you have to go way back when you start thinking of somebody that actually influences the game to that degree. Um, but you know, Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, Steph Curry, uh, best long range shooters of our generation. What do you think?
well, I mean, Steph is rewriting everything. I mean, like he's doing things nobody did. He's doing the kind of things that people would do in a game of horse when they'd had about 8 beers, right? He's taking shots in games, in NBA basketball games, that we talked about this. Like you just wouldn't even try these shots unless, like I said, you were playing horse with a friend and you had several beers. He shoots from everywhere. I'm convinced at some point he's going to take, like the kind of shots that you normally see like at the end of a game or end of a half, or someone just kind of throws it. But he doesn't. But that's the crazy thing about it. He's able to shoot 60 something foot shots with his completely normal looking jump shot motion, right? You don't see him loading up. You don't see him doing anything
No,
special or different. And I still think that's the most underrated part of Steph Curry's game because he doesn't look like a person who's enormously strong. But to be able to shoot shots from where he shoots shots with a completely normal shooting motion means you have exceptional strength in your shoulders, in your chest, in your abdominal muscles. He's got to be exceptionally strong to shoot those shots with a completely normal motion because he's not doing anything different or special, and he's dropping shots in from 58, 59, 60, 61 feet, looking just the same way you would shoot from 17, 18 feet. It's it's insane. It's just so different from everything else. So, I mean, I grew up. I grew up watching Del Curry. I mean, I watched Del Curry at Virginia Tech with Bimbo Coles in that backcourt at Virginia Tech. I've watched a lot of great shooters, right? Dennis Scott. I mean, a long list of great, great, great shooters, and obviously Reggie Miller at UCLA, and then later in the NBA, Jesus Shuttlesworth, aka Ray Allen at UConn, and then later in his NBA career. I caught the very tail end of Jerry West. Of course, the 3-point shot wasn't a big deal really in his career, but if it had been, I promise you, he would have mastered it and done it at a high level, and been a great. I mean, he was a great shooter. He would have been a great 3-point shooter if the 3-point shot was, a thing really when he played. But nobody does what Steph Curry does. I mean, he's revolutionized basketball. I don't know what else to say.
Well, there's a great story within that story where Ray talks about his relationship with the Del Curry family and how a young Steph would come to their practices and shoot around with them and hold the zone, and they knew that this young kid was going to be somebody special. When you think of the relationships that were built, Del Curry, Ray Allen, Del Curry, Reggie Miller, and this young kid being the beneficiary of all of these great shooters and learning their styles, their techniques, getting pointers from them as a young man. He, like you say, he's definitely revolutionized the game. Um, I also heard something that I thought was very funny today because, well, it did come from Stephen A. Smith and the crowd on that other sports network. But Stephen A. Being a Knicks fan, and someone made the accusation that Knicks fans are as bad as the Cowboy fans. As a matter of fact, he called them the Cowboy fans of the NBA East. Uh, and when you look at the way Knicks fans are so loyal, always believing that in spite of their roster, that they're going to make a difference in the East. Do you find this uh, statement rather characteristics of Knicks fans?
Well, I think the big difference, if someone's trying to compare the Cowboys fans to the
Knicks
uh,
fans.
well, the big difference is that you have, I'll use the term bandwagon. You have these people who have no real connection or affiliation of really any type, quite frankly, to the Cowboys being Cowboys fans. I mean, in all different parts of the country, and outside of the country, quite frankly, right? In Sweden and Poland and American Samoa, you'll find you can't escape Cowboys fans. Any place where there's fans of American football, you'll find Cowboys fans. The same is not true of the Knicks. The Knicks do not have a worldwide fan base. Their fan base extends throughout New York, New Jersey, a few parts of Connecticut. Uh, if you go to if you walk around in like Nashville, Tennessee, sorry, you're gonna find Cowboys fans, right, in Nashville. Try to find a Knicks fan in Nashville. I challenge you. So that's the big difference. They don't have the same sort of footprint. They may pretend that they do, but they don't. The Knicks are not, they don't move the needle nationally. People aren't just talking Knicks basketball everywhere. I mean, though New York thinks it's everywhere, it's not. The Knicks are not as important as they think they are, right? The Cowboys, whether they are as important as they think they are, everyone does talk about them. They've got that part right. Everybody talks about the Cowboys. Everybody doesn't talk about the Knicks. Might that change someday? Sure, it might. The Knicks have the opportunity to maybe turn it around and do better. Excuse me, but they haven't shown a propensity to do it yet. They've, I mean, I want to use the term snake bit because they're not really snake bit so much. They just do Knicks things. They do a lot of Knicks things, the Knicks, right? They do a lot of things. You say, oh, there's the Knicks doing Knicks things. There they go. And yeah, I mean, they don't have love them or hate them, right? The Cowboys are just woven into the fabric of this nation, and I wish they weren't, but in a way, and even beyond the boundaries of this country, in a way that, I mean, maybe the Yankees, maybe the Lakers, maybe sort of kind of Boston Celtics, sort of, but in that they have fans not only all throughout the United States, but fans even in other countries with no real direct affiliation or nothing regional, nothing to directly tie them to the team. I just don't see that with the Knicks. If you're just walking through a mall in Minneapolis or Topeka, Kansas, or Winslow, Arizona, you're not going to see Knicks gear in the stores or on the people. But you can find Cowboys gear in any sporting goods store or whatever, any place where they sell jerseys or sell hats or sell whatever. You're going to find Cowboys stuff because there's Cowboys fans every freaking where. So, no, sorry, Knicks fans. You're not the Cowboys of the NBA. The white sounds funny saying that, but no.
Oh, well, I have to go to a subject now that pains my heart. Uh, Watching what the Wolverines did to my Buckeyes. Uh, and to me, it was a matter of overconfidence. We talked about the defense of the Buckeyes all year, and I think they started to read some of their press clippings and thinking that if it's a shootout, we can win a shootout with anyone. So I'm going to blame that on the game plan, and as I said, on being very much overconfident going into this game. I think that Michigan State game was maybe
I'm
the
going to
worst
have
thing that
to
happened.
disagree a little bit. This is the rivalry game. Even when
Right.
even when Michigan is bad, gets up for this game, James. Come on. I mean,
But but
not
hold it now, hold it. No matter, even when it's a rivalry game, there haven't been that many close games these last 5 years.
right. But that's not
So,
because somebody didn't get up. This is one team decided to
well,
destroy the other team because they
well,
had
well,
the
it's like
hammer in their hand.
Well,
So
it's like a Michigan State games. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best two teams, but yeah, it's a rivalry. But this year, Michigan State went into that game, thinking that hey, all we have to do is beat Michigan and then Ohio State, and like I said, they got uh, they beat Michigan, and Ohio State was got a little overconfident. I think after the way that they handled Michigan State. Maybe if
well,
that had been a
there's
more
some significant
difficult game.
differences between those two teams.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh,
so
oh,
so see, I unlike you, James, I was able to unemotionally watch that and not make a bunch of rather strange excuses about how the game turned out. It was very simple, and Josh Gaddis laid it out. He said that Ohio State's a very good team. In fact, a great team, but they're not a tough team. They're not a team that has great physicality on either their offensive or defensive lines. And he's right. They have tremendous skill talent. They have tremendous team speed. But who's the pass rusher who's going to go in the first round? Who's the great defensive tackle who, is incredibly active
well,
and
that,
on the interior?
but
But
that's
I'm
what
just pointing out that this team isn't like
that's
a
what
team
we've
that we
pointed
see
out
that.
all year about Ohio
Oh,
State.
right. We've been talking about this all year. And I'm just saying they attacked weakness. It wasn't overconfidence. This team has weaknesses, and Michigan's strengths happen to be Ohio State's weakness. That's what it was, James. The strength of Michigan is their offensive line and their running
But
game.
okay, now the Michigan running back managed to score what 5 touchdowns against Ohio
Yeah,
State.
well, Hassan,
Right,
and Blake
but
Corum was their
but
primary running back, but yeah, it was the day for Hassan Haskins instead. Yes.
right, but do you think that he is a better running back than the Michigan State running back that we
No,
held?
but
But
he has a better offensive line.
yeah,
I
okay,
can
you're
tell
right,
you
right.
that.
I definitely agree with that part. Yes, I would.
I mean, you played enough football to know that it's not decided by who has the better running back, right? If your running game's
Right.
effective, you can have average running backs, right? I mean, no offense to Terrell Davis, who was a very good running back, but Terrell Davis would not have been Terrell Davis if he didn't play for the Denver Broncos. That offensive line was the best offensive line, especially in the running game, not only of in the NFL, in that era, right? I mean, they were the best run blocking line of that era. Like once the Cowboys started to go this way and that Denver Broncos team started coming up that way, nobody could touch them from 96, 95, 96-ish till 2000-ish. And even once Terrell Davis went away, they turned Mike Anderson into a two-time 1,000-yard rusher. Reuben Drones went for almost 1,400 yards on that team. Quentin Griffin, like, God, they were getting guys off the street. And when they got a talented guy like Portis, who had back-to-back 1,500-plus yard rushing seasons, because he actually had real talent, but it was the offensive line, right? And that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that their running backs are good. They can't touch Kenneth Walker III. And, of course, Kenneth Walker III was getting business done, but they stopped. They couldn't afford to keep. I mean, he had 4 carries for 25 yards. I mean, it's not chump change. You know what I mean? Like, he was averaging 0.25 yards a carry, James. But they just stopped using him because they got so far behind. But getting back to this game, right? Ohio State got pushed around. It had nothing to do with confidence. They could have had no confidence, right? And soon their confidence was gone pretty quickly because they realized we're going to get pushed around. And there's no worse feeling when you realize the other team is can simply overpower you, and that's what they did.
Yeah, just we might as well tell you what we're playing. We're running we're running here. We're hitting this hole here,
Yep.
Yeah,
and there was nothing they could do about it.
But now it's kind of interesting to me because I didn't see Notre Dame coming. I never saw that coming. But anyway, so here's the scenario. Georgia beats Alabama, which we've all talked about, making Alabama a 2-loss team. Then Michigan winning the Big Ten over Iowa. Cincy stays undefeated. So who's number 4? We got Oklahoma State. They'll be playing Baylor.
Yeah, to me, if Oklahoma State wins the Big 12, that's number 14 for me.
Okay, now if they lose, do you sneak Notre Dame in there?
Well, if they lose, then yeah, you're kind of almost out of options. I mean,
oh no, there's a lot of 11-1 teams now, not necessarily Notre Dame.
Well, I mean, yeah, almost out of options, but I mean, Oregon would have to be considered, assuming they don't lose the Pac-12 championship. They'd have to be in consideration.
But they're 10-2.
But right, so they're 10-2. I mean, obviously, like I said, Notre Dame would be the most if Oklahoma State loses, would be the easiest team to slot in there. And yeah, because Wake Forest has also picked up. Yeah, so yeah, it's hard to find somebody else to sort of push in there. Now, obviously, the SEC is going to try to say that you got 2 teams, but I've been saying this all year long. The SEC as a whole is just not that good this year. Now, Georgia's amazing, but the SEC as a whole is not that good this year. I've been saying this for a while. Now, obviously, if Alabama wins, now they have an argument for 2 teams, right? That's the only way I can see the SEC getting 2 teams. If Alabama beats Georgia, it'll be pretty much impossible to keep 2 SEC teams out.
Yeah, because the only other team that would be with 1 loss would either be San Diego State or Houston, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the committee doesn't have any love for either of those 2 teams.
Speaking of no love, and this is something that we've talked about since we've had this college football playoff. It seems that once again we have a board that has been unable to come to a decision about the expansion of the playoffs. Your thoughts on that? Because to me, isn't it all about the finance? And I mean, it would seem to me that this would generate more money, for all the right reasons, and it would be good for college football in general. Why do you think there's such a bulk on the expansion? Is it, do you think this
Well,
has more
I
to
mean,
do with
the first
politics?
roadblock is the, the first roadblock is contractual. It as much as you and I would like to think that they just go into a room and say, "Here's what we're going to do," it's not that simple. When they first put this thing together, everyone signed a whole bunch of contracts, particularly TV contracts, right? So you can't just say we're moving it up to 8, right? It doesn't work like that. You have to renegotiate a bunch of things, including your TV deal has to be renegotiated at that point. So as long as the current TV contract is in place, I think they're pretty much locked into 4. I think as soon as the TV contract is up, I do believe we will see expansion, most likely to 8. That's what I believe will happen once the current TV deal has
But don't you think
expired.
that TV, being the beneficiary, would also be flexible to say, if you come to an agreement, then we can make some kind of compromise?
I
I
think they
mean, yeah, I mean, it is for the benefit of TV also.
right. No, I think they'd be willing to do it. Still, a lot of negotiations would go into it. I don't think it's just something you just show up and do. But yes, I would very much like to see it. I would like to see them, meet and discuss it and figure out a way to make that expansion happen. And yes, everyone benefits. I mean, monetarily, everyone benefits, which is kind of the point anyway. So yes, I would like to see them figure out a way to get that done. And I do think it will happen. I just think, like I said, it's going to take some, like anything else, some negotiations, some, horse trading or whatever term you want to use to get to that.
Let's talk about some coaching moves. Brian Kelly says that the LSU job was just too good to pass up. Well, it's what, $3 million less than uh, Michigan State. And Bill, you have to you have to make me understand this. Here's a man that gets what, a $90 million contract over 10 years, but he also needs a $1.2 million loan.
Mm-hmm.
To me, point of contract, wouldn't that have been a signing bonus? Why do I need a loan if I'm getting a $91 million contract? But I mean, that's just my thinking. But maybe you can explain, since you know a little bit about that end of sports more than I do, and probably the average fan that's listening.
Well, what I'm going to, and once again, I should not assume, but I'm going to assume that that loan is probably a no interest loan, which is
Yes, it's a no interest loan.
right. So, know what you do with a no interest loan? You take that 1.2, you put it in something stupidly safe. I don't know, bonds, whatever it is, and then whatever it is you're supposed to pay it back, you pay back, the principal and keep that interest. Even if you're making, I don't know, 5% year over year and it compounds annually, over 3 years, that's turned into tens of thousands of dollars of free money. And you just get, when you, even once you pay back the interest, and you pay back the capital, you still keep the interest.
But if I just signed a 10-year, $91 million contract, like I said, hey, this is my signing bonus. No interest, or what? I mean, if I guess my question is, if I signed for 91 million over 10 years, why do I need a loan for 1.2?
Yeah,
I'm
well,
I'm
something
sure. I'm sure that I mean, just do the math. That's what, 9 million a year.
Yeah, it would probably end up being more than that. I mean, I'm assuming he's going to hit at least some of these incentives. So, first of all, there's a $500,000 retention bonus. So every year he doesn't leave, right? That's an extra $500,000 for just not leaving, right? We're just okay. So you have to add that in, James.
Right.
Then,
So in
and
two
every time he
years,
makes
that's
a bowl game,
two
right?
years.
So,
That's my bonus in 2. I mean, that's my 1.2 million in 2 years, right? Five hundred
so
thousand, 500,000, and if I make one bowl game,
So here's how his bonuses break down. $75,000 each time they play in a SEC title game. 150,000 for winning the SEC championship. 500,000 for being bowl eligible. 100,000 for making a New Year's Six bowl. 200,000 should you make the college football playoff semifinal. 300,000 for making the college football finals. 500,000 for winning the college football championship. 50,000 for being SEC coach of the year, and 75,000 for each time he wins National Coach of the Year honors. And then there's the buyout. So the buyout, should he leave as long as Scott Woodard? Now this is the language. If he leaves while Scott Woodard is still athletic director. So if Scott Woodard leaves, all bets are off. But $4 million is what he has to pay to buy out in the first year of his deal. $3 million year two, $2 million in years 3 through the end of the contract is his buyout. And once again, only counts as long as Scott Woodard is still in place as AD. So that's a fascinating little rider to have in there in terms of his buyout. Now, LSU has now fired the last 2 head coaches after they've led the national championships. So they owe him 100% of his remaining salary if they were to fire him after he brought a national title to them, right? So, and if they fire him without cause, they owe him 90% of whatever his remaining contract is in whatever the years are left on the contract. So, yeah, it's a pretty decent deal. And there's some clauses in this contract that he did not have in his Notre Dame contract. So but here's the most important thing, James. A lot of those players that he recruited at Notre Dame that he couldn't bring into Notre Dame because they couldn't, hit certain things in terms of the academic matrix, a combination of either test scores or grade point average. And not to say that LSU is not a fine institution of higher learning, but let me just say, a lot of those roadblocks will be removed for him at LSU. So it is an easier place to recruit. That is simply factual. I mean, it's a place where you can win a national championship. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, James. They have not won a national championship at Notre Dame since 1992. Was that the year of the Tony Rice year? No, it might have been before that. Was that 80? Was that 88? It's been a very long time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They have not had a national championship there since, I think, maybe pre-BCS. It may have been BCS, but it may have been pre-BCS was the last time Notre Dame was a national champion. And while I'm like I said, while I'm not going to say it's impossible to win a national championship at Notre Dame, it is extremely difficult to win a national championship at Notre Dame. In part because of what I said about the academic matrix that they use to determine, which they relax slightly for athletes, but they don't wipe it out. It's still in place. They just, massage it a little bit. And of course, it's a cold weather, place. I mean, not too far from me. I know exactly where and have been to that, to South Bend. It's a great place. I mean, don't get me wrong. They have tremendous history and mystique and tradition and all that good stuff. And the facilities are good. They're really good facilities. I mean, they're great facilities. But LSU just frankly has them beat. I don't know how else to put it. LSU has more of everything. You know what I mean? Like, they have more. Whatever you have at Notre Dame, LSU has more of it. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And the only thing really missing, if you're Brian Kelly, from, when they induct you in the Hall of Fame, you would like them to say two-time national champion, right? Or whatever, right? Or even at least one-time national champion. Right now, that's the big hole in Brian Kelly's resume, and he wants to fill that hole, James. So, I mean, I understood completely. I was not shocked. I thought he'd be in play for USC as well. But logically speaking, I can see him looking at his various opportunities and thinking that the one that had the clearest direct shot to winning a national title would be LSU. Because if you can win the SEC, you are literally guaranteed a spot in the national championship game, while winning the Pac-12, frankly, does not automatically guarantee you a spot in the national championship game. So when I thought about it the way that I think he's thinking about it, it made perfect sense.
Yeah, well, I can understand that point, but unless there's some big changes in Tuscaloosa, the road to a national championship for LSU might be a little harder than the road that Lincoln Riley has chosen. Lincoln Riley has chosen to bring his talents out here to the West Coast.
Yep.
And to me, even though it's USC, it's a whole lot less pressure than it is coaching in the Pac-12 in the Big 12. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if you pay attention to recruiting, but he's already flipped at least one OU commit to USC, and he won't be the last. USC is about to go from having, solid, decent recruiting classes to back to being top 5, top 10 right away, like that. Watch. And while that's not everything, it's a lot. Winning the recruit, and let's not forget, even while he was at Oklahoma, Riley always did a good job of recruiting the West Coast. He's always had good, prominent, important players that came from the West Coast. So he's not unfamiliar with recruiting California. He's going to be a good fit there. My only real question and concern is what happens on the defensive side of the ball. But if he brings in the right people and they continue to get top 4, top 5, top 6, top 7, top 10 type talent consistently, he'll win. It'll be back to being, maybe not quite what we had in the Pete Carroll years. I mean, I think that was sort of I think that was sort of lightning in a bottle, right? They had some solid seasons under John, well, not just solid. They had some great years under John Robinson, but I think it'll be closer to that, to the John Robinson kind of era. Better than, Ted Tollner era. I think they'll be doing better than that. And with Larry Smith, I think they had Larry Smith. It'll be better than the Larry Smith, Ted Tollner years. I promise you that. But not quite John McKay and not quite Pete Carroll. But yeah, like the John Robinson era, yeah, I can see them getting back to that and getting back there quickly. I can see them being consistently 10, occasionally 11, but consistently 9 to 10 wins, right? Just like that.
And speaking of staying with the coaching situation, we have a head candidate for the Notre Dame position. What do you think about the possible new coach of? As a matter of fact, I put it down, and the winner is the new head coach, Marcus Freeman. A lot of people think that Marcus has a chance to build a dynasty at Notre Dame, kind of in spite of the academic uh, kind of hindrances that you think that maybe exist.
Yeah, well,
what's your assessment of Mr. Freeman?
Well, I wanted him at USC, so I think he's going to do extremely well. They were smart. Notre Dame was smart to move on him They named him interim, immediately after Brian Kelly made it, public that he was headed to Baton Rouge. And as I just said, I think he's going to be terrific. I think they're going to do extremely well. He's managed to keep some key staff members, which was a big question. How many people would make the move? And obviously, I think they'll lose some people, but a lot of their very key people, including Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, has already announced that he's staying. And a few other people have made it clear that they have no problem with continuing to coach at Notre Dame under the direction of Marcus Freeman. He's an incredibly impressive individual. He's a terrific recruiter, terrific X's and O's, respected, a leader, organized, smart, tough. I mean, what do you want, right? Played a couple of years in the NFL, was a terrific player himself in college. To me, he's a complete package. I think it's a great hire. I know they haven't officially gone official with him as the permanent coach, but they know that if they don't make him their permanent head coach, he's going to be snapped up, right? He's going to be someplace else, somebody else's head coach. So I don't think they're going to let him leave their program. I think he gets the job permanently.
Bill, I look at the NFL where we supposedly have the Rooney Rule in effect, and then I look at college football, and it seems like I know that there are in sheer numbers there are more jobs available. I understand that, but it does seem to me that it is much easier for minority coaches to make headway in college football than it is in the professional ranks, even though we have that rule in place. Is it just because of the sheer numbers involved?
No, it's not just because sheer numbers involved. It's a different culture. It's a different. I mean, things that people try to say are a disadvantage in the NFL or somehow advantages in the NBA, right? We've seen several, maybe not several, we've seen a handful. I'll put it, we've seen a handful of former NBA players with literally zero coaching experience walk into NBA coaching jobs. That would be literally an impossibility. Well, let's just say literally an impossibility, but it's a virtual impossibility. The NFL always wants you to quote unquote earn your stripes, right? So they always say that one of the disadvantages that some black coaching candidates have is they were too good as players, right? We're hearing that a bunch. Oh, they played too long. Oh, these guys, these other guys, these John Gruden types are going straight into coaching right out of college, right? They're GAs by age of 22, 23. They're position coaches by 25, 26. They transition from college to the NFL by about 27, 28. They work their way up from quality control to position to coordinator. And by 32, 33, 34, they're coordinators. And so by 41 or so, they're a head coach, right? That's the excuse that's always been offered. They're still frightfully small numbers, right? Both at the college and pro level of black head coaches. So assuming, and I guess we're both sort of assuming that Marcus Freeman will be made the permanent head coach. And, I would like to believe that as well. But if indeed that is the case, and like I said, I'm going to go ahead and add him with the hopeful assumption that he does join the number. He joins Jay Norvell. Right. Oh, yep.
Well, he has the endorsement of the SPORTSKRIB, I'm sure.
Yes, he does. He has the endorsement of the SPORTSKRIB. Indeed, he does. But yeah, he joins Mike Locksley, Jay Norvell, Charles Huff. Obviously Mel Tucker, Herman Edwards. I don't think that's all of them. Hold on, give me a second. None in the Big 12, right? see. Willie Taggart. Let's see who else. Let's see. Did I
See,
name?
it's frightening when you have to think of whether or not you named them all.
Well, I mean, the number is never so big that it's that hard. Franklin. Thank you. James Franklin. Or said Loxley. Oh, and Babers. There it is. I've done it now. And Dino Babers. So the number of FBS level black head coaches is and has been a low number, right? Especially in the Power Five. It is and has pretty much always been a low number. I mean, I was excited, obviously, when Charlie Strong, got a big time flagship job, but was blown out of there fairly quickly. You know what? I did forget one. Sorry, David Shaw. Thank you. At Stanford. David Shaw at Stanford. That's the other one in the Power Five. It's David Shaw at Stanford. But David Shaw at Stanford is, in a nice, solid situation. He could be there as long as he wants to be, as it appears, because they stick with him through good seasons and bad. Franklin's mostly had very good seasons at Penn State. Obviously, 2020 was kind of a one-off, so they kind of had a bad year. But I think people sort of chalked that up to the COVID-19 pandemic. So he's fairly safe, and his name came up obviously when somewhat associated with both the LSU and USC jobs when they opened. But I don't think he wants to leave Happy Valley. I think if he does leave Happy Valley, it would only be probably for an NFL job. And I don't know if that's coming. So he's probably going to be there for a good long time. Charles Huff is a very young coach, but he's headed in the right direction. He's been doing great work at Marshall. I think at some point in the next couple of years, he's going to get a Power 5 job. Mel Tucker, of course, is going to be coach for a very long time at Michigan State because he has a big-time buyout, and that's a state school. I mean, some of them move on, but generally, I think they're looking to stay with him for the long term. Herm obviously is an older man. I don't know how much longer he's going to be down there at Tempe, but my guess is at least another year or two before he decides to retire and either just put his feet up or go back into television. Jay Norvell is killing it up at Nevada, and no one talks about it enough. He's been a co-offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. He's done great work with quarterbacks and wide receivers at a bunch of different schools. And frankly, I wouldn't have minded him at USC, to be perfectly honest, but I don't think they even interviewed him. But I don't know. I don't know that for a fact, but I know that he deserves to be interviewed for a big-time job. Dino Babers is at a school that's pretty patient. Syracuse understands what they are now. And so despite the fact he's been hanging right around 500 the last couple of years, they've been patient with him. I think that they need, once again, so much of what he does is built around, the kind of stuff they were doing at Baylor, but he doesn't have Baylor speed, So he needs to find somebody in his recruiting operation who has very strong connections to Florida, quite frankly, and can start getting them some speed kids, more speed on that team, particularly in the skill positions. And he can start really getting some work done at Syracuse. But I think he's going to be safe for a while. I think Mike Locksley is on the verge of a breakout at Maryland. If you watch a lot of Maryland football, and I do, they're in, as they say, but they're in almost every single game. They get blown out once or twice a year, especially by teams that are vastly superior. But they generally make it difficult. They generally hang around, and they're another team that is another couple of recruiting classes away from being an 8-win team. I think a couple of recruiting classes away from being an 8-win team. Let's see. The SEC, let's see, Big 12.
Let's see.
Billy Taggart's down there back in the Sun Belt and doing pretty well. Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say breaking news. Memphis beats Oklahoma City 152-79.
All right, then.
152-79. And Oklahoma is the seed that's Oklahoma Thunder is the team that have beat the Lakers twice this year. Am I correct? I think so.
Yeah.
But anyway, but anyway, that 73-point victory, of course, is the largest, I believe, in NBA history. The way that they have it going across the wire right now. But yeah, as I was saying, and as you were saying, while we are making progress, I think it's still by baby steps, not necessarily by. We're not quite walking yet, but I think we've maybe gotten to the crawling stage.
Yeah. Well, and once again, thank you for mentioning the largest margin of victory in the history of the NBA. That is certainly something to. That is certainly something. That is something. But to what you were just talking about, the crawling, walking, stumbling. I mean, pick a metaphor. The point is that though everyone wants to say the right things about inclusion and diversity and hiring the best person for the job and whatever, it's still way too difficult for black candidates to even get an interview. That's my main issue. Is that so often, and of course there is no Rooney Rule in college,
Right.
and because there's so few black ads, the old boy, old girl, old whoever network punishes non-white candidates. And let me just make a quick shout out: Marcus Arroyo, Andy Avila, not Andy Avalos. Yeah, I think it is Andy Avalos. Let me see who else at Boise. Marcus Arroyo at I think UNLV. I think there might be one other, but there's we now have a few Hispanic, Latino and Hispanic head coaches at the FBS level. Not many, but a few. And I'll never understand why Ken Niumatalolo, I think, is still, and Kalani Sitake are still it. I think they're the list for Asian Pacific Islander head coaches at the FBS level. And why Robert Anai, who has been a great coach for 20 something years, has never been a head coach, I will never understand. I don't know why it took Norm Chow till he was darn near 70 to get his first head coaching job at the collegiate level. I do hope that, in addition to black candidates, I hope that Asian and Pacific Islander candidates, Latinx, Hispanic,
Well,
everybody,
that
women.
that's why I loosely use the term minority candidate to include women as well as men of color. So yeah, that's why I try to use that specific phrase. But let's jump off here into the NFL. And I heard a very interesting statement today Troy Aikman made, and he said that all-star teams don't win in the NFL. What's your thoughts about that? When you see, like the Rams, for instance, how they've tried to assemble their team together. I think we saw
Well,
the same
let me
thing
just ask
with
you. Let me
Al
just ask you real
Davis
quick,
also.
James. Who won the Super Bowl last year?
Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Do they not qualify?
You have to qualify, but are they the exception rather than the rule? When you look at some of the other teams, I mean, look at Cincinnati. Cincinnati, I think at one time had a team because I used to always make fun of them. They had 11 first-round draft picks, 11, all starting, and they finished last in the AFC North. And this was
Well,
for
I mean, that's
years.
not how I define an all-star team. That doesn't mean you drafted them. That doesn't mean they're good. I mean, if we're talking about all-star teams, that to me that means a bunch of people who've been to Pro Bowls and even been named All Pros.
Well,
and
let's go for
loaded
some
with
of the
people who
Rams teams, some of the Raiders teams. I think when you look at some of the teams that Al Davis put together, strictly names, and to only win less Super Bowls than the Cowboys or the Steelers. But I mean, like I said, you can kind of go back in history. Whereas last year that worked. You know, look at how I mean, of course you blame some of it on injuries and the fact that usually those players tend to be maybe on the downside of their career. Tom Brady, Randy Moss, but what is your thoughts? The
well,
Patriots wouldn't be. I guess they wouldn't be a good example either.
I think I just made my thoughts, but I'll just throw out that if you look at especially the quote unquote dynastic teams, they were always loaded with people who made All Pro and made Pro Bowl teams. I mean, those Steeler teams of the '70s were loaded with players all over the field that were headed to the Hall of Fame or headed or deserved to be headed to the Hall of Fame. I, I mean, I was trying to say.
Weren't most of those teams put together from the draft, especially when you talk about the
So
Steelers?
the issue is not okay. So that's what I'm saying. So the issue is not that there's a bunch of stars on the team, right? So the issue is not that. The issue is how you constructed it through the
Right,
draft.
right.
Well, that makes more sense. Yes. Now, obviously, once again, it was sort of a mix with that Tampa Bay team. They had a good nucleus that came through the draft, but then they brought in, people like Sue. They brought in obviously people like Brady. They brought in people like Gronkowski. They brought in. I mean, they brought in some additional players to put them over the top through free agency and things like that. In addition to a solid nucleus that they had built through the draft. So yeah, I mean, I understand what's being said there now. Here's what I will say. The preferred way to build your team through the draft, because it's the most cap friendly way to build your team through the draft, right? When you start building your team through free agency, you're paying a premium to do so. So that makes it less sustainable. I still think you can win a championship, but you can't win championships that way because, like I said, not sustainable. The math won't be mathing, as they like to say, right? You can't keep them together for very long. When you build the draft, you're more likely to be able to hold that team together for a longer period of time because you have more time with them on their rookie deals, right? But once you have to start paying everybody, especially when you're paying at a premium in free agency, 2 years is probably close to as long as you can keep that all together. Maybe 3 if you get lucky. I mean, we're about to see what's going to happen with Tampa Bay. The bill is going to come due on that team in the next couple of years, and they're either going to have to let a lot of people go, and of course, a lot of the older players. I mean, Jason Pierre-Paul's probably coming to the end of his career in Tampa Bay. I mean, a lot of those players are going to have to move on just because of money, or unless they want to take pay cuts to stay, which a guy like Brady might, but not everybody, especially the younger players. Younger players don't do that. That's only for older players who've already made a lot of money.
Wow, I didn't really see anything wrong with that last play, uh, but maybe it was just me. Anyway, um, Cowboys. Interesting enough, they're ahead after halftime, 13-10 over the New Orleans Saints, but they have lost 3 of their last 4. Even though they're 2 games ahead in their division, Bill, are the Cowboys just that team? Are they basically, as the late Dennis Green would say, they are who we thought they were?
Well, I mean, I've kind of been consistent about this. I said that I thought they would win the East, and I thought that that's all that would happen. Right? I thought that that would be the extent of it. I mean, they might win a playoff game, but I never bought into them beyond that. I was very clear throughout about that.
The Clowns GM says Baker will play his best football after the bye. Wishful thinking.
I mean, he'll be healthier, so yes, that makes sense. I mean, he's been nursing a list of injuries, right? So he had a gash on his hand, I believe. He had a hamstring, I believe. He had the torn labrum and an ankle sprain, I think, on top of that too. I mean, it's like I don't know if you remember watching Monty Python's, what do you call it? The Holy Grail, right? Where the Black Knight is having the duel and just a flesh wound. You know, he was falling apart. So I would hope that he would start playing his best ball, having some time to hopefully heal. Doubt what you want about him. You can't doubt his toughness. I mean, he's played through a litany of injuries this season.
Hey, I'm a Steelers fan. Big Ben is my quarterback. I don't want to hear that. Anyway, okay. Mac Jones. He is reportedly going to file for a trademark for MJ10. Do you think it's a little too soon for him to be, like uh, going out or as some people say, copying uh, Tom Brady's TB12? I mean, when you look at some of the other quarterbacks, Cam and some of them, I mean, it took them a while to establish themselves as how do I put it? Sports merchandising icons to a certain extent. Do you think this might be a little too soon for Mac? I mean, this is just his rookie season. Next year, maybe defenses will be catching up.
Well, catching up to Mac Jones because he's just operating the offense. It's not like he's Cam Newton. It's not like he's Colin Kaepernick, where he's doing something outside of the offense. He's the opposite of that. He's just operating the offense. So, James, unless you're figuring out what the Patriots' offense is, you know what I mean? Like, you don't catch up with Mac Jones because all Mac Jones is doing is functioning within the offense. That's what he does. He did it at Alabama. Like, people don't seem to be able to understand what some players are for some reason. I've watched Mac Jones. Michael McCorkle-Jones has been on my radar since he was a backup at Alabama. And there's things I noticed about him right away. He processes extremely quickly, right? There's no defenses don't catch up to a guy who thinks fast, right? I mean, he's intelligent. He thinks through things quickly. He makes good decisions. You don't catch up to that. That's just what he is. That's, you know what I mean? There's no catching up to that. And he's accurate enough. He has enough arm strength. I mean, they had another guy who kind of was that, right? Now, Tom was a little bigger, had a little stronger arm. But Thomas Edward Patrick Brady was someone that you don't exactly catch up to, even though he's not a special athlete by any stretch of the imagination. And neither is Michael McCorkle-Jones. So you don't catch up to what he's doing. You might catch up to what some rookies are doing because they run around and make plays out of, off schedule, outside of the offense. And then you figure out, like with Josh Allen, when he leaves the pocket rolling to his right, all you have to do is do this, right? Because he's only accurate rolling to the side where his arm is, right? He can only be accurate rolling to the side. If you force him the other direction, he's incredibly inaccurate. So yeah, that is figuring someone out. But that's not what Michael McCorkle-Jones is. There's nothing to figure out. This is what he is. He's a great decision maker who figures out things quickly, who's very good at reading defenses, who is accurate, especially intermediate to short, and has enough arm strength. Ta-da! What's there to figure
out? NFL.com says that the Steelers should be along with the Panthers and the Saints seeking the services of Jimmy G next year. What's your thoughts on that? I'm still holding out for Aaron Rodgers, but
I mean, obviously, the jewel in the crown would be Aaron Rodgers. Okay, so there will be a marketplace for Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo to me is sort of like white Teddy Bridgewater, right? A guy who, one, is a bit brittle, two, can help your team to win games if your team has enough surrounding talent, and three, is just good enough to take a team a certain distance, to get you so far. But unless your team is constructed a very special way, he won't get you all the way to where you're trying to go. So if you're talking about as a sort of placeholder quarterback while you develop a younger quarterback, sure, whatever, fine. But there's cheaper options that'll do it roughly as well. Washington's likely to move on from Ryan Fitzpatrick because they would decide to ride with Taylor Heineke or because they're going to draft another young quarterback, or maybe both. I think he's going to be cheaper than Garoppolo, and you're less likely to have a quarterback controversy when your young quarterback is ready to take over than if Garoppolo comes out and plays well enough. You'll have certain people who probably rally, around him. So everyone knows what Ryan Fitzpatrick is and is not, and more importantly, Ryan Fitzpatrick knows what he is and is not. He's just happy to play another football game. So I'm making a move maybe for him. If they move on from Cam, I wouldn't mind him as sort of a placeholder type quarterback. If we're just talking about someone that's there while you develop your rookie that you drafted. If you're talking about the long-term solution, the 49ers decided that Jimmy Garoppolo was their long-term solution. How did that work out for them?
No, I don't think, well, we'll see. Not even for the Panthers or the Saints would I make Jimmy G a long-term solution. Even though Demetrius isn't here, I have to talk about Matt Stafford and, of course, Goff, Jared Goff. Do you think that both teams, even though the quarterbacks got a change of scenery, which may have been good for them, but did either team improve by this quarterback switch as far as
Well, one
at
team
least by
did.
the eye test?
Yeah, one of them did. Yes, the Rams definitely improved, James. If you've been watching the Rams, their offense is measurably more dynamic. I can give you statistics. Their average yard per play is up.
But give me wins.
Is up. Their points scored is up. Pick a statistic.
But give me wins. Are they going to win more games than they did last
Well,
year?
that's not up to Matt Stafford. You know what I mean? Like he can't play on both. Well, I guess he could theoretically play on both sides of the ball, but they don't do that.
He's got Aaron Donald on the other side. I don't want to hear about that defense now. Come on. He's got the
Aaron Donald's still just one. He's still just one dude. Who's facing double and triple teams every time the ball is snapped. The people you should be getting on are people like kid from Georgia who came there from the Bears, who is seeing who isn't seeing double teams because of people like Aaron Donald. What's his name again? I can see him in
Van Jefferson. No, Jefferson's the rookie.
Well, Van Jefferson is not a defensive end.
Oh, you're talking about on defense.
That's what we're talking about. Is their defense. Their offense is fine.
No, we're talking about the quarterbacks, though. We're not talking about
the defense. And Matt Stafford's doing his job. I mean, he's had maybe one bad game and one slightly below average game, but the rest of the season he's been somewhere between very good and great.
Well, Jared Goff hasn't had anybody to throw to. He doesn't have a running game, except for.
Well, he's on a bad team, James. He's now experiencing what Matt Stafford experienced for all those many years.
He knew that when he got there. It wasn't like, oh, by the way, we're sending you to a bad team. All he had to do was look up the record for the last decade.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very bad team. Now, the good news is they're going to have some very
if it wasn't for the
attractive draft
Steelers,
picks, and if they do a good job drafting, this team could be much better in 2 years. Much dramatically. They could be better in 1 year and be dramatically better in 2 years.
if it wasn't for the Steelers, they'd be 17-0. They should they should be sending gift swag bags to the Steelers, but that's a
Oh, who will
different
prevent them from being 0-17?
yes. Uh, except for the Colts and of course opposing coaches, do you think that Jonathan Taylor could be the Don Rickles of running backs in the NFL? I mean, everybody talks about Derrick Henry and this back, and then you said, well, who's the leading rusher? Jonathan Taylor.
Well,
Who's
I mean, everyone who actually knows football knows how good Jonathan Taylor is. Maybe, the press on the East and West Coast doesn't talk about him enough or whatever, but people who know football know how great he is. He's exceptional. He's amazing. He's great. He's terrific. We're talking about a guy who's 230 pounds, who's one of the fastest running backs in the league. He's brilliant. He's amazing. He's fantastic. Like, pick a term. Right? Pick one. He's absolutely fantastic. He was my number one running back. I had him ranked ahead of Kamara. I had him ranked ahead of Saquon Barkley. I had him even ranked slightly ahead of Derrick Henry. Now, I might have been wrong on Henry, but when I went into the fantasy drafts, I was targeting him. And I only got him in one of the fantasy drafts that I was in, but I'm so glad I got him in that one.
Yeah, you and me too. I only have him in one.
Yeah, well, and smartly, people snapped him up. I tend to play in leagues with people who know what the heck they're doing, but he's a terrific player. He's a complete player, and while he might not be quite Kamara as a receiver, he's a good receiver of the ball. He's good enough in blitz pickup. There's no part of his game that you can call a full-on weakness. Nyheim Hines is, the guy who's the better receiver of the two backs that they tend to use, but he's a good enough receiver. And, I was sold on him fairly early on in his collegiate career. I was like, this guy's going to be great as a professional. Like, I've been there with him for quite some time. I am not a tiny bit surprised by the career he's had.
Boy, if Tyson threw that in front of him, he'd be gone. Anyway, let's talk about Gronk here. Gronk is on the brink of breaking Tony Gonzalez's record of 31 100-yard games. I think it. How many years did Tony play? I forget now. But anyway, do you think that his breaking this record would make him the GOAT of tight ends? Talking about Gronk, that is.
Well, I'm going to say no. And I still put Kellen Winslow up there because he played in a very different NFL. Gronk wouldn't be putting up the numbers he's putting up if he had to play in the 70s or 60s. We both know that. And even Tony Gonzalez, the rules had begun to change during Tony Gonzalez's career. So here's where Gronk's better than Tony Gonzalez. He's a better blocker. Tony went from being a very poor blocker to at least a serviceable, solid, average blocker through hard work and practice and things like that. Gronk was always a good blocker. He became an absolutely exceptional blocker. But, it's like when you point out that, Drew Brees or whoever it is puts up, twice as many touchdowns in his career as Johnny Unitas did. Does that make him twice as good as Johnny Unitas? No. Johnny Unitas played when Unitas first enters the league, they're playing 12 games. Then they go to 14. So, the seasons are a different length. And you could hit a quarterback in the base of the spine with a truck transaxle and it was play on when Unitas enters the league. It's a completely different game, James. There was no illegal contact rule. The game is just so radically different. You could saddle up a wide receiver like a pinto pony and ride him all over the field.
I'm telling you, I remember those days.
Oh my gosh, yes, I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Okay, that's why they made Stickum, pal. If you didn't,
So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I mean, as much as I love statistics, and I do, I also understand context. And just the fact that he's had more 100-yard receiving games than, Tony Gonzalez, or I guess any tight end in the history of the game, isn't the thing that would make me put him above a guy like Kellen Winslow or whoever else you want to mention as the number one tight end.
Well, Bill, I was hoping some that Don would be able to get here, but I think we're going to set a record tonight. We've never been under 2 hours. So, is there any particular subject you want to breach or things you
Well,
want
I'm
to talk
I'm
about?
working I'm working on an article about it'll show up on Around the Block Sports about if is this the thing? Is the Marcus Freeman hiring? If once again, I'm assuming that happens, the thing that finally breaks the ice around hiring black candidates, minority candidates, whatever term you want to use, who haven't jumped through all the hoops. Because in the past, they wanted you to work your way up the ladder to prove you could win in a smaller program. Like, you had to do all of it. Like, all the boxes had to be checked to get a big time job as a black head coach. Tyrone Willingham had to check all the boxes. Then,
I have a great title for your article if you don't yet.
okay,
Is Marcus Freeman college football's Barack Obama?
that's an interesting way to put it. I have to think about that. I have to think about that. I have to think about that. I mean, he won't
But
be
go ahead. No,
he's not the first, so
no,
it's
no, but
to
Notre Dame and all the prestige to go. That's what I'm
right.
thinking.
I mean,
The
it would have
Notre
been
Dame mystique.
unthinkable. Right. I mean, they've had a black head coach, obviously there, but it would have been unthinkable for someone to get there without having been a head coach before. But Tyrone Willingham, when he got hired, had been a
Been a head coach before.
and had done it before at a place with high academic standards, in fact, and had won fairly consistently in his days at Stanford. And Stanford is one of a very few Power Five schools to have hired more than one black head coach. Northwestern is on that list. There's I think 4 schools amongst the Power Five have hired multiple black head coaches. Not many have, but Northwestern, Stanford. There's I think 2 others. Who are the other 2? I can't remember right now, but I know there's been a couple others. But my point is that I'll mull. I'll think about it. That's not a terrible title. It's just it's not accurate. I mean, I like the way it sounds. It's
Well,
just not.
well, the way I'm saying this, and I'm also thinking of some other parallels here, as Brian Kelly moves on to, uh, of course, LSU. Had not Mike Ditka decide to stay as head coach of the Chicago Bears, things might have turned out very differently in Chicago.
Well, here's what I will say. Like I said, I'll think about what I'm going to calling this thing, but I'm going to take a look at the history of the FBS in terms of hiring and firing black head coaches, going all the way back from Willie Jeffries and working, to Marcus Freeman. Once again, with the assumption that he actually gets the job permanently.
Yeah,
Uh,
tomorrow we'll find out somebody else has the job, right? But that's
yeah, well then I will have a very different article to write if it turns out he decided to, hire Jim Mora or something. But short of them hiring
the,
Jim Mora or Bob Stoops or something like that, um,
the
Bob,
assistant coach
a
from
Catholic
Baylor.
kid from Ohio, right? Just like Urban Meyer, a Catholic kid from Ohio, and of course that's the other sort of big name still hanging out there is Urban Meyer, who that was always his quote unquote dream job. And he'd been an assistant there. And once again, a Catholic kid from Ohio. But yeah, what I will do is I will start working on this article and we'll see if I need to refocus it or change it based on what happens. But yes.
Starting, of course, Monday, we're still going to be talking about two verdicts on my the show, my political show, as well as uh, uh, the recent Michigan school shootings. So you're welcome to join us, Bill, if you can this Monday. And of course, we're going to start out the year with a topic that's very close to your heart, and that is white Christianity. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, and we'll take that up later. But thank you so much for your time, as always. We look to get some of the other guys back. And Bill, if you wanted to give a kind of a final shout out to some of the sites where you write, and uh, you can tell us. Of course, we'll be talking fantasy this Saturday, football. So, any things that kind of hit your
Well,
observations this
I'll
week?
just mention something very quick. First of all, today is the anniversary of General Pete Dawkins winning the 24th Iceman Trophy in 1958 while he was in Army, and go Army, beat Navy. The Navy game is one that obviously has a special place in our hearts, and to some extent, a special place in the heart of our nation. And I hope with all the things that we've seen happen recently in our country, and some of these things have been things that are greatly, you know, greatly divide us, right? One of the things that can bring us together is sports, and another thing that can bring us together is seeing a bunch of young people commit themselves to the service of their nation. And whether or not our nation is right or wrong, right? This is the country where I have grown and my daughter grows and my family has set down roots here, rather forced to set down roots here, but nonetheless have set down roots here for 10 plus generations. You know, on my father's side of the family, the first reference we know to a relative of ours is from 1790, referring to a burly Negro who had escaped and was on his way to Baltimore, Maryland, and attempting to reach freedom. Scipio, what his name was apparently recaptured and brought back. Who knows what would have happened if he'd managed to make his way to freedom? Of course, I guess maybe I wouldn't exist. Who knows? But in this nation, with all of its various flaws and all of its various problems, racial, gender, economic divisions of various sorts, when the Army Navy game rolls around, and of course, I have a built in rooting interest, but I know people have no real built in rooting interest who will somehow find a way to choose a side and root either for Army or Navy. And whichever side you find a way to choose, hopefully Army because Army's going to win. I hope that this does serve to be one of those little things that moves us back towards healing as a country. As angry as I often am at the things that go on here and the way that certain voices are amplified where other voices are muted, I hope that on that day, when Army beats Navy, that we can come across many of these divides and many of these fissures in our national firmament and in our plate tectonics that sort of push us together and then push us apart. Remember that competition, right? Friendly, in quotes, competition has the ability to remind us of certain things. And football, which is often used as a metaphor for so many different things, can remind us about how being pushed to do something difficult with a bunch of other people who are pushing towards the same goal can remind us that if we are willing to put aside certain things and push towards a goal together, great things can be accomplished. So that is my final thought.
Well, you have a great night, Bill. Hope to see you
Same to you, sir.
Saturday. And as for our audience, thank you for joining us. Demetrius, you have a safe flight. Don, hopefully we'll see you next week. Have a great night, everyone. Talk
Yes,
to you
good evening,
next week
sir.
right here on the Sports Crib.